Building and resource management games have always been some of my favorites. Banished is one of these. It was released in early 2014. Well, I got my hands on it a bit earlier when the game was still in early access. At the time, it was a fun little game, so let's dig it up to see what changed and if the game still holds up. Banished is a city town builder with a survival aspect. The premise goes as follows: the player takes charge of a group of people that were banished from their homes for their deviant tastes, who now need to create a new life for themselves far away from civilization, with the only contact to the outside world being the odd trader that comes by to offer his wares. Starting out, the player is greeted by the shining Rock Software logo, the one-man development studio responsible for producing Banished, followed by the game's main menu, with all the options that such a menu usually provides, and most importantly, letting the player start a new game. But before that, it would be recommended to stop by the tutorial section to get the gist of the game explained. Before starting a new game, it's possible to adjust a few parameters to change the difficulty as desired. Once in the game proper, the player takes control of a small group of people in the middle of the wilderness with only a few basic supplies in winter fast approaching. The first order of business will be to secure the necessary supplies to keep villagers from doing such unproductive things as freezing to death or dying from starvation, by constructing houses and providing the fuel required to heat them in winter, as well as plenty of food for the villagers to eat. As long as the two basic needs are fulfilled, villagers will stay alive, leading productive lives until they die of old age. Sounds easy enough. Unfortunately, these particular people seem to have the average intelligence of a potato, and will, without the guidance of the player, do little except walk in circles, starving themselves. But guiding these villages to their happiness is easier said than done. It's impossible to give them direct orders. Instead, the player designates an area that should be cleared, and any free villager will proceed to harvest any resources in the area. Or villagers need to be assigned a workplace. For example, once a gathering hut has been built, one or more villagers will need to be assigned to the gathering labor before they will start collecting wild foods in an area around the hut, with more jobs becoming available as the proper buildings are constructed. As far as fuel production is concerned, there's not much to it. Simply make sure there are enough woodcutters chopping logs into firewood. Food production is more varied though. Villagers will start feeding the population through either fishing, hunting, or just gathering wild plants until proper agriculture has been set up, opening the potential to farm 8 kinds of crops, grow 8 more types of orchard trees, and raise 3 different kinds of animals, allowing for a diverse production of food. And it is important to keep the food production diverse. Diseases can break out and destroy crops or kill animals, which is detrimental to any village that relies too heavily on a single source of food. In addition, having villagers eat only one type of food is unhealthy in the long run. To keep villagers properly healthy, it's necessary to provide at least one of each type of food group: proteins, fruits, vegetables, and grains. If the food groups are not available, it helps to set up a herbalist to provide healing herbs to the population for a temporary health boost. Low health villagers are more likely to catch and spread diseases, and they will be a lot less effective at their job, spending more time recovering their health instead of working. Beyond the basic needs, villagers need tools and clothing to make sure they do their assigned tasks in a timely fashion. Tools are provided by a blacksmith who makes basic iron tools out of logs and iron, or once a source of coal has been established, proper steel tools that don't wear out so fast. Villagers without tools will still complete their tasks, but at a much slower rate. Clothing helps keep villagers warm when they are outside in the cold, so they do not have to run back to their house to warm back up. Clothing is produced by a tailor out of leather, wool, or both. Finally, the last stat a villager has is happiness. Now, they can commit suicide, so they won't die from low happiness, but they will stop working until the happiness goes back to acceptable levels. Usually not a problem because as long as a villager has what they need, they will be fairly happy. But there are ways to boost overall happiness, like setting up a tavern and brewing alcohol, referred to in the game as ale, out of various fruits. The only way to grow the town's population to either replace villagers that died or increase the labor pool is for the villagers to have children. These children will grow up into adults over a few in game years, eventually take their own jobs, and have children of their own, slowly growing the population. With the population growing, it's important to provide enough housing for everyone and make sure the production of food and other essentials does not fall behind. This gives the game a slow paced, almost soothing feeling, and with the only outside connection being the peddlers that come by, it's time to sit back, relax, and slowly build a small community in the middle of the wilderness. At least until the realization hits that there's nothing to do in this game. Most people's experience will most likely go along the lines of start a village, fail. Start a second village, do a little better, fail. Start a third village, get much farther, but still fail. Start a fourth village, thinking there will be even more to see this time. Succeed, and realize there really was nothing more to see. Everything in this game just feels unfinished, as if the game never left its beta stage before being released. A real shame. The first year of setting up a village are interesting, but once any form of food production has been secured and the first handful of winters survived, it quickly becomes trivial to assign more villagers to produce food as the population grows. Soon after, everything will be seen and done at least once, and after that, it becomes a cycle of build more farms, woodcutters, houses, in that order, to reach a higher population and nothing else. The game appears to be complex, and most of its features have an interesting start, but just amount to nothing. Other than food and firewood, there are no other resources or production chains to manage. Having all buildings unlocked from the start and ready to build is nice and admittedly better than arbitrary limitations, but it really does not help the lack of progression in the game. Once every building has been placed, nothing really changes. Whether 50 or 500 people live in a town, the only noticeable difference will be the amount of houses and fields. The aging and dying of villagers is an interesting idea for increasing the population, except the population will only increase if there are enough empty houses and stagnate if they're not, resulting in slow population growth and not much else. Often having the players sit around at max speed, waiting for more villagers to age up to adulthood, making me often wish for something more interesting, like a fire or the plague. The survival aspects are a decent challenge and a neat idea, at least until the trick to setting up villages has been found out. Then most of the challenge disappears, becoming more based on luck whether the brain dead AI decides to play ball or not. Choosing harder difficulties does not change any part of the formula, except the amount of resources the player starts out with, just increasing the chances of the AI killing itself or disaster wiping everyone out early. The AI is the biggest annoyance the game has, with the villagers having an acute interest in starving. This is due on how the AI manages its resources. A villager will attempt to store at least a year's worth of everything they need in their house, and then go back to their house whenever they need something. Good in theory, but in practice it can lead to silly things like a farmer that is harvesting cabbages beside a barn filled with said cabbages, going home to eat cabbages. As far as collecting what they need, the AI does an okay job, but it can't see resources that have not been placed in storage first, so a blacksmith beside a coal mine will not use any of the coal the mine produces until the coal has been placed in a stockpile also beside the blacksmith. Conventional logic would be that having extra laborers around to carry the resources and placing houses close to the production sites would solve this, but no. Moving resources from production buildings to storage is strictly the job of the people working in them, because the AI can't see the resources in the building. And since it's not possible to select who gets what job, only how many villagers are assigned to a job, the person living beside the mine might just be the tailor working in the town center. This is just the stuff that makes sense. The pathfinding likes to break, causing farmers to produce less food than expected because they took the long way to the fields this year. By far the worst, though, is how the AI prioritizes tasks. The AI is supposed to find other tasks once it's finished or can complete the original task, but this somehow makes getting the AI to do anything fast practically impossible. Even when using the priority function, it can take a year or more to get anything done, because the person that got assigned the task is in the forest talking to the deer. As if dealing with the AI is not enough, the user interface is clunky. It's functional for small populations, but anything more than 2 or 3 dozen villagers is a pain, due to the player not having enough information available about the resources in town, and not enough control over the villagers, or anything really. Too many of the things just happen automatically. Building a town hall is essential to have any idea of what is going on in town. But even with all the extra data and graphs from the town hall, once the population reaches triple digits, getting a good picture of what is produced and consumed in the village becomes an educated guess at best, due to the AI pathing potentially leading to some serious production variations between years, leaving the only way to be sure that everything the citizens need is available overproducing everything in large quantities. To be fair, once the population reaches triple digits, the labor pool would be so large that overproducing everything won't be an issue, and there's nothing really left to do anyway. The one saving grace the game has are the mods. The developer was smart enough to release a mod kit for the game, letting players modify it as they see fit, saving the game from being just a mediocre city builder with a survival gimmick. The modding community is rather active, still developing new mods to this day, from small modifications to full on overhauls, adding plenty of new buildings and items, letting players build some truly interesting and unique towns. Unfortunately, they can't fix the underlying issues, namely the confusing UI, if not making it worse by adding too many new objects and the clinically stupid AI. All in all, the game is not awful, but without the mods, it quickly becomes impressively boring after the first dozen in game years. It was programmed by just one person, and considering that, the game looks good and is impressively stable. The only time I started running into serious bugs and crashes was when I started to mess with the mods. That alone, however, does not make this game good. It's not worth its full price by any means. The vanilla game is forgettable, feeling unfinished for a full release, and has been abandoned by the developer anyway. While the mods add a lot of content, it's just extra fluff, not really changing the crunch. If the game can be quite on the cheap, however, one way or another, it might be worth a look from people that enjoy small scale, relaxing, town building games. Otherwise, though, there are better and cheaper alternatives out there. So, with this, I'll bid you farewell, fellow gentlemen, until we meet again.